Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If Prototype Antihero Was in DC Verse, Part 4. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Chapter 55. The Bait. The old bus wheezed to a stop at coordinates that didn't exist on any map, its engine ticking in the sudden silence like a dying heartbeat. Alex sat 3 rows back, watching condensation form patterns on the dirty windows as his fellow passengers stirred restlessly in their seats. The elderly woman with her knitting had stopped mid-stitch 10 minutes ago, her old hands frozen above half-finished blue wool. The businessman hadn't turned a page of his newspaper since they'd left the highway. Even the young mother's baby, who'd been fussing constantly, had gone unnaturally still. A chill crept up Alex's spine. As a psychologist, he'd learned to read people, to notice the subtle signs of distress or unusual behavior. Did you truly believe you could destroy Grodd's plans and simply vanish into the night without any consequence? A deep, arrogant voice poured into Alex's mind. Around him, the other passengers began to twitch, small, mechanical movements that spoke of their minds being crushed under telepathic control. The businessman's head snapped toward him slowly. "Off," he commanded in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "All of you. Now." Alex's breath caught. The voice was wrong, the tone completely different, but more than that, there was something behind the man's eyes. Something that wasn't him. The passengers except Alex rose as one, their movements synchronized like multiple puppets on a single string. "Hey!" he called weakly to the elderly woman as she shuffled past with vacant, staring eyes. His voice cracked. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" She didn't respond. None of them did. Alex's hands were shaking now. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to hide, but his legs carried him forward anyway. He couldn't abandon these people. Whatever was happening to them, he had to try to help. Outside, the passengers arranged themselves in a neat line facing the tree line, standing at perfect attention like soldiers awaiting inspection. Alex slipped off the bus and positioned himself at the end of the line, his mind racing through possibilities. Mass hypnosis? Some kind of gas? Mind control? The forest began to convulse. The tall trees bent and cracked as something monstrous forced its way through them. A massive gorilla stepped into the moonlight. Grodd 9 feet tall, all muscle and dark fur, his red eyes sweeping over them like a butcher reviewing pigs for slaughter. When the creature stepped into the moonlight, Alex's knees nearly buckled. "Behold," Grodd growled in the same voice that had invaded his mind. "This is what happens when weaklings try to challenge those above them." Alex pressed himself against the side of the bus, taking a shaky breath to steady his nerves. "Gee, Grodd." His voice came out as barely a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Why are you here? What do you want with these people?" "Them, not them. I am here for you." The creature's laugh made his teeth ache. "Me, Grodd, someone who is the future of your pathetic species, someone who is the peak of evolution, was denied my prize. You have foiled my plans and now you will pay for what you have done." He gestured lazily at the elderly woman, who stepped forward without resistance. "This useless waste of carbon has perhaps 30 more years of meaningless existence ahead of her. Now watch as I start your punishment with a little blast." Grodd's massive hand closed around her throat slowly, savoring her helpless gurgles. "Can you hear that sound, thief? That's the last pathetic breath of a life so insignificant that the universe itself will forget she ever existed." The snap of breaking vertebrae echoed through the clearing like thunder. The woman's body collapsed to the forest floor, and Grodd kicked it aside, sending her spilling blood across the dirt with her entrails trailing behind. "Please," Alex gasped between dry heaves. Oh God, please stop." God. Grodd's amusement was toxic. "There is no God here, insect. Only me." He gestured at the businessman, who stepped forward with the same obedience as the old woman. "This one fancies himself important, a professional, no doubt. Let me show you what I think of him." Grodd's claws tore into the man's chest, twisting and ripping until ribs snapped like twigs. He lifted the dying man high above his head, letting blood rain down on his fur. "Look at him struggle," Grodd mused, watching the businessman's mouth open and close soundlessly. Even now, his inferior brain refuses to accept that his life means nothing, that he was always nothing but an ant waiting to be stepped on. He hurled the corpse aside casually, already moving toward the young mother and child. "Stop!" Alex screamed. "Please. They're innocent. The baby hasn't done anything wrong." Grodd's smile was pure malice. "Wrong, right? Those are meaningless words, human, made by weak minds to feel important." He seized the mother's arm, twisting until bone tore through flesh, savoring her scream like a delicacy. "This cattle exists only to breed more for superior beings to command," Grodd explained as he slowly crushed her windpipe. "And this larva will never be smarter than a foolish chimp. Do not thank me, consider it mercy." He held the mother suspended, forcing her to watch as her child dropped to the ground. The baby hit the dirt with a soft thud, unnervingly still, its fate unknown. "You want to know what I think of human innocence?" Grodd asked, his red eyes fixed on Alex's horrified face. "I think it's the pathetic delusion of a species too weak to accept its place in the natural order." He dropped the broken woman beside her motionless child, then turned to the bus driver, who stepped forward like a man walking to his own execution. "This one's mind was so hollow that controlling him required almost no effort," Grodd said. "He is barely more intelligent than the vehicle he operates. Perhaps I should put him also out of his misery." Grodd's backhand caught the driver across the temple with bone-shattering force. The man's head twisted completely around before his body crumpled like a broken toy. "4 meaningless lives," Grodd announced, turning his full attention to Alex with the satisfaction of a cat that had finished playing with its prey. "4 insects, all dead because of you. And their deaths proved nothing except your total helplessness. Tell me, do you like it?" Each step the gorilla took seemed to make the very ground tremble. Alex scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go, just the bus behind him and 9 feet of gorilla bearing down on him. "I'm nobody." Alex gasped, tears streaming down his face. "Just a psychologist. I just want to help people. I've never hurt anyone." He grabbed Alex by the throat, lifting him like a specimen. "But you did do something interesting, didn't you? In that girl's mind, you brought her back whole somehow. You should have known, Grodd never acts without a backup. The moment I failed, my imprint was meant to latch onto the one responsible." Alex's feet dangled helplessly as Grodd's grip tightened around him. "And now I'll rip it from your mind," Grodd hissed. "Every memory, every thought, every worthless dream you've ever had, gone. By the time I'm done, there won't be enough left." Alex's vision began to tunnel, darkness creeping in at the edges as his consciousness started to fade. Grodd's smile widened with sadistic anticipation as he prepared to begin his true work, and then a voice, calm, amused, spoke from somewhere behind them. "You know," it said, "for someone who claims to be the perfect evolution, you're remarkably stupid." Grodd went perfectly still. Chapter 56. The Ocean of Minds. The elderly woman's body contorted as she slowly pulled herself upright, her neck twisted at an odd angle and the broken vertebrae crunching as she moved. "You know, for someone who claims to be the perfect evolution, you're remarkably stupid." Grodd's massive head turned slowly, his grip on Alex's throat loosening slightly as confusion flickered across his face. The voice had been calm, completely in contrast with the carnage surrounding them. "Who dares?" Grodd began, then stopped. The businessman's corpse began to convulse, his shattered ribcage grinding against itself as dark blood escaped from his chest wound. The great Grodd, master of minds, can't even tell when he's being played. The bus driver's body twitched violently before his completely reversed head began to slowly rotate back, each vertebra popping audibly like breaking twigs. His jaw hung loose and dislocated, swinging to and fro as he gargled through the blood pooling in his throat. "How was it?" "My performance. Though I have to admit, you really committed to the whole superior being act. Very theatrical." The young mother lifted her head, cradling her motionless baby as blood trickled from her crushed throat. It was entertaining, much better than your counterparts in the zoo. I gotta give it to you. The corpses then began to move. Not the mechanical movement of mind control or the jerky movement of reanimation, something far stranger. The bodies were melting. Dark, viscous liquid poured from the wounds Grodd had inflicted, but instead of blood, it was something else entirely. Something alive. The biomass flowed across the forest floor like oil, converging on Alex's feet and climbing up his legs. As it did, the corpses revealed what lay beneath, not innocent passengers, but the twisted remains of criminals. A loan shark missing half his face. A drug dealer with prison tattoos covering his arms. A human trafficker whose neck bore multiple scars. You see, Alex explained conversationally as the biomass continued to merge with his body, I knew you would come to me for revenge sometime in the future. I mean, I would have to be an idiot to not know you will target innocents when you find me. So I decided to find you. Your imprint was a lot of help. The last of the biomass absorbed into his skin, and Alex's form began to shift subtly, his muscles becoming more defined and his posture straightening despite Grodd's grip. Though I have to say, killing my decoys so brutally was a nice touch. Really sold the whole terrified psychologist angle. Grodd's grip tightened, claws piercing skin. Clever tricks. Human. But you are still nothing before the might of Grodd. Your mind will break like all the others. My mind. Alex's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, please. By all means, take a look. The psychic assault hit like a sledgehammer. Grodd drove his consciousness deep into Alex's mind, expecting to find the usual landscape of human thought, memories, fears, and dreams, all ripe for manipulation and control. Instead, he found himself standing on the shore of something impossible. An ocean. An endless, churning sea of consciousness that stretched beyond the horizon in every direction. And in those dark waters, shapes moved. Thousands upon thousands of minds, each one distinct, each one struggling toward the surface with desperation and hunger. Let me out. I repent. Please, just let me die. The voices rose from the depths like a chorus of the damned, and Grodd realized with growing terror that each one was like a complete person. Criminals whose memories Alex had consumed along with them. What? Grodd whispered, his psychic probe recoiling instinctively. What are you? More shapes rose from the depths. The memories of every criminal Alex had ever absorbed, but changed somehow. Broken. Make it stop. I'm sorry, please make it stop. The pain won't end. Why won't it end? I can feel what I did to them. Oh God, I can feel it all. And binding them all together, holding this ocean of consciousness in perfect balance, was something that made Grodd's primitive mind recoil in fear. Not human. Not animal. Something else entirely, a will so vast that it used these thousands of minds like cells in a greater organism. You wanted to see my mind, Alex said, his physical voice somehow reaching Grodd from somewhere and everywhere. This is what I am. Every monster I've consumed becomes part of something greater. And you. The ocean began to churn, and Grodd felt something vast moving in its depths. You're about to join them. Grodd tried to withdraw his psychic probe, but it was too late. Tentacles of pure thought wrapped around his consciousness, dragging him down into that ocean. He felt his mind being dissected and his memories being consumed. Fascinating, Alex murmured. Gorilla City. The alien ship. The experimental radiation that gave you your powers. How delightfully crude. Though I suppose when you're working with such primitive base material. The memories flowed freely now. Grodd's childhood in Gorilla City, the meteor that had crashed nearby. The radiation had accelerated his species' evolution, granting him intelligence and telepathic abilities far beyond his primitive kin. The irony is beautiful, Alex continued as Grodd's mind was stripped bare. You gained your powers from an accident, yet you convinced yourself it made you superior. When really, you're just another failed experiment that got lucky. In the physical world, Alex's free hand had closed around Grodd's wrist. The gorilla's massive arm began to dissolve as biomass consumed it, adding Grodd's genetic template to Alex's ever-growing collection. Stop, Grodd gasped, both physically and mentally. I am Grodd. I am the future of evolution. No, Alex replied calmly as more of the gorilla's form was absorbed. You're just raw material. The absorption was complete, but instead of consuming Grodd entirely, Alex began reshaping him. The gorilla's massive form shifted and condensed, his consciousness rewritten and bound to Alex's will. When the process finished, Grodd stood before him, physically unchanged but mentally transformed, his red eyes now holding the same cold feeling as his new master's. You understand your purpose now, Alex said, brushing imaginary dust from his clothes as he flexed his fingers experimentally, feeling new neural pathways forming. The reborn Grodd nodded slowly, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. I serve the balance. I am your instrument. Good. For now, lie low. Return to Gorilla City and maintain your normal activities. When I need you, and I will need you, you'll know. Alex's smile was cold. A telepathic powerhouse with your reputation will be massively helpful for my future plans. Interesting, he murmured, accessing the absorbed memories. Telepathy requires specific brain structures and synapses that humans don't naturally support. I'll need to research the gorilla genetic markers and find a way to adapt the physiology without compromising the base human template. He looked down at where Grodd had stood moments before, then at the corpses of the criminals his biomass clones had been impersonating. Thank you for volunteering, he said to the empty air. Your sacrifice will serve a greater purpose. The black envelope materialized in his hand, not for any victim this time, but as a reminder to himself. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about evolution. About taking the worst humanity had to offer and transforming it into something that could protect the innocent. As Grodd lumbered back toward the deeper forest, Alex watched with satisfaction. Soon, he would have assets positioned across multiple cities, each one perfectly loyal, each one waiting for their moment to serve the greater design. Alex turned his attention to the corpses scattered around the clearing. He sent streams of biomass flowing from his body back into the fallen criminals. Their forms shifted and changed, the loan shark becoming the kindly grandmother with her knitting, the drug dealer transforming into the businessman with his newspaper, and the trafficker reshaping into the young mother with her baby. Within moments, the passengers stood exactly as they had when the bus first stopped, their eyes vacant but alert, waiting for direction. The forest showed no signs of the violence that had occurred, no blood, no torn earth, no evidence of Grodd's presence. As Alex walked back toward the abandoned bus, he could feel the new telepathic abilities settling into his consciousness like a powerful but unfamiliar tool. The gorilla genetics would need research and careful integration with his human form to avoid compatibility issues. The scales of justice are broken, Alex said quietly. I am the balance. Chapter 57. Charity Work. Martin Reeves adjusted the plastic tablecloth one more time, smoothing out a wrinkle that probably only he could see. The community room at Sunset Gardens retirement home was alive with quiet chatter and the soft sound of mugs tapping saucers. Warm afternoon sunlight poured through the wide windows, laying golden patches on the carpet where elderly residents sat in little groups. Stop fussing with that table. You're making me nervous, Emma laughed, balancing a tray of fresh-baked cookies as she stepped out of the kitchen. Her auburn hair was tied in a messy bun with a few loose strands framing her face, and a dusting of flour clung to her blue volunteer shirt. Even after hours of baking and serving, she still wore the bright smile that had first caught Martin's eye 2 years ago in the university library. Sorry, Martin said, finally stepping back from the table. I just want everything to be perfect for them. Mrs. Lewis specifically asked if we'd have those chocolate chip cookies again. And we do. Emma set the tray down dramatically. 3 dozen, just like she requested. Though I suspect Mr. Wilson is going to try to sneak extras again. As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Lewis shuffled over with her walker, her face brightening up at the sight of the cookies. At 83, she moved slowly, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her cardigan buttoned up despite the warm afternoon. Oh, you beautiful children, she said in her gentle, accented English. You spoil us old folks. It's our pleasure, Mrs. Lewis, Martin said, carefully selecting 2 of the largest cookies and placing them on a small plate for her. How was your physical therapy session this morning? Terrible, she said with a mischievous grin. That therapist, she makes me work too hard. But I tell her, listen, young lady, these legs carried me across an ocean and through 70 years of marriage. They deserve some respect. Emma giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Did you really say that to her? Of course not, Mrs. Lewis winked. I'm too polite. But I thought it very loudly. Martin smiled as Emma's face lit up at the old woman's joke. This was why he loved her so much, not just the way she looked when she laughed, but how she truly enjoyed these small moments with the people the outside world had mostly forgotten. They'd been volunteering at Sunset Gardens together for 8 months now, every Saturday afternoon without fail. It had started as Emma's idea. She was studying social work and needed volunteer hours for her program. But Martin had tagged along that first day and found himself surprisingly moved by the residents' stories and grateful expressions. These people had lived full lives. They'd fought wars, raised families, built careers, and survived losses, and now they spent most of their days in small rooms with few visitors. Mr. Martin, a rough voice called out from across the room. Come here, I want to show you something. Frank Wilson, a 79-year-old former construction worker, sat in his usual spot by the window. His rough hands held a wooden carving that he'd been working on for weeks. Frank had been teaching Martin basic woodworking techniques, insisting that every man should know how to make something with his hands. Martin walked over and examined the small figurine. It was a bird, a cardinal, judging by the carefully carved crest on its head. Frank had been working on it for a long time patiently, using only a small knife and occasionally asking Martin to help steady his hands when arthritis made the delicate work difficult. Frank, this is incredible, Martin said, turning the carving over in his palm. The detail work is amazing. It's for my granddaughter, Frank said gruffly, though Martin could see the pride in his old face. Her birthday's next month. She's turning 16. Can you believe that? Seems like yesterday she was this tiny thing who used to climb on my shoulders. She's going to love it, Martin assured him. How often do you get to see her? Frank's expression dimmed slightly. Not as often as I'd like. Her parents are busy, you know. Jobs, school activities, life. He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. But she calls sometimes. Sweet kid. Martin felt the familiar pang of sadness that came with these conversations. So many of the residents had families who visited rarely, if at all. The staff at Sunset Gardens did their best, but there was only so much they could do to fill the emotional void left by absent loved ones. Hey Martin, Emma called from across the room. Can you help me move this chair for Mrs. Peterson? Dorothy Peterson, 91 years old and sharp as ever, wanted to move to a spot with better lighting for her crossword puzzle. She was known for completing the Sunday New York Times crossword in under an hour, a speed that amazed even the younger staff. Of course, Mrs. Peterson, Martin said, carefully lifting the chair and positioning it exactly where she indicated. Perfect, she said, settling into the seat with satisfaction. The light was creating a glare on the paper. At my age, every advantage helps. She looked up at him with bright, intelligent eyes. You know, Martin, you and Emma remind me of my late husband and myself when we were young. The way you two work together and care about us people. Martin felt heat rise in his cheeks. That's very kind of you to say. I'm not being kind, I'm being observant, she said matter-of-factly. Harold and I were married for 68 years. You learn to recognize real partnership when you see it. That girl of yours is special. Don't let her get away. I don't plan to, Martin said quietly, glancing over at Emma, who was now deep in conversation with a group of residents about their afternoon activity options. Mrs. Peterson followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. Good. Harold used to say that finding the right person to share your life with is like finding a perfect piece for a puzzle. It just fits. Everything else becomes easier when you have that. The afternoon moved along quietly. Martin served tea and coffee, fetched things from high shelves, and listened to stories from years long gone. Emma led a small craft session, helping the more mobile residents make paper flowers for their rooms. Together they wiped up spills, refilled water glasses, and offered the warm, patient company these seniors so often longed for. Around 4 o'clock, they began the cleanup process. Martin stacked chairs while Emma washed dishes in the small kitchen. The residents gradually dispersed to their rooms for afternoon naps or to the television lounge for their daily programs. Same time next week? Mrs. Lewis asked as they prepared to leave, though she asked the same question every Saturday. Absolutely, Emma replied, giving the older woman a gentle hug. We wouldn't miss it. You two are angels, Mrs. Lewis said, patting Emma's cheek with a soft, wrinkled hand. Real angels. Outside, the late afternoon air was crisp with the promise of autumn. The sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the lot and bathing Sunset Gardens' brick walls in golden light. Martin loaded their supplies into the trunk of his Honda Civic while Emma said goodbye to a few staff members who were just arriving for the evening shift. I love this time of year, Emma said, joining him by the car. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fallen leaves. Everything feels so peaceful. She pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. Look what Mrs. Patterson gave me. Martin leaned closer to see the photo Emma had taken. It was the crossword puzzle, completely filled in, with a handwritten note at the bottom. For Emma, thank you for making an old woman feel young again. She insisted I take a picture, Emma laughed. Said she wanted me to have proof that her brain still works at 91. That's so sweet, Martin said, then grinned. Though I think you're the one making her brain work better. You remember everyone's stories, their favorite snacks, and even their family names. Emma blushed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It's not hard to remember when you care about someone. See? That's what I'm talking about. Martin shut the trunk and turned toward her. The sunlight caught the copper in her hair and her cheeks were pink from the busy afternoon. She looked beautiful and at peace, just the way he imagined her whenever he daydreamed about their future together. What's that look for? Emma asked, tilting her head with an amused smile. I've been thinking, he said, leaning against the car. Dangerous habit, she teased, stepping closer to him. I'm serious. He reached for her hands, intertwining their fingers. Her hands were soft and warm, with a small bandage on her knuckle where she'd scraped it against the oven door earlier. About us, about all this. He gestured toward the retirement home. I love spending time here with you. I love seeing how you make everyone smile, how you remember little details about their lives. I love that you genuinely care about these people. Emma's expression grew soft and attentive. Martin. Do you remember our first day here? He continued. You were so nervous about making a good impression that you practiced introducing yourself in the car for 10 minutes. And then Mr. Wilson spilled coffee all over your white sweater in the first 5 minutes. And you immediately gave me your jacket, Emma said softly, her eyes growing distant with the memory. Even though it was freezing outside and you were just wearing a t-shirt underneath. You looked so horrified, like you'd ruined the whole day, but then Mrs. Lewis started laughing and said coffee stains were just proof of a life well lived, and suddenly everyone was telling their own spill stories. Martin brought her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you were going to fit perfectly into my life. Into any life, really, but hopefully mine. He took a breath, his heart starting to race. I know we're still young. We've got school to finish and careers to start. But when I look at you, when I see us together like this, I can picture our whole future. Emma's eyes widened slightly. What kind of future? Everything, Martin said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Graduation next year, you walking across that stage to get your social work degree, me finally finishing my education program. Maybe we move in together after that and get a little apartment with a kitchen big enough for all your baking experiments. My baking experiments are not that messy, Emma protested with a laugh. Tell that to my kitchen ceiling, Martin said dryly. But I love it. I love finding flour in my hair 3 days after you've made cookies. I love how you leave little notes in the margins of cookbooks, rating recipes, and suggesting improvements. I love that you cry during every romance movie but pretend it's just allergies. I do not cry during romance movies, Emma said, though her voice wavered with barely suppressed emotion. The Notebook. You sobbed through the last 30 minutes and went through like half a box of tissues. Martin grinned. And then you made me promise to love you even if you got old and forgot who I was. That's a reasonable request, Emma said quietly. Which is why I said yes immediately. Martin's expression grew serious again. I can see us getting married someday, nothing fancy, maybe something small with just our families and the friends who matter most. Mrs. Lewis could be your honorary grandmother. Emma's breath caught. You think about us getting married? I think about everything with us, Martin admitted. A house with a garden where you can grow those herbs you're always talking about. Maybe kids someday, little ones who inherit your kindness and your terrible habit of singing off-key in the shower. I do not sing off-key. Emma protested, but she was smiling through tears that had started forming in her eyes. You absolutely do, and it's adorable. Martin reached up to cup her face gently. You want to grow old with me? Emma asked quietly, her eyes searching his face. I want everything with you, Martin said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. Every day, every year, every wrinkle and gray hair and creaky joint. I want to argue with you about what to watch on Netflix and have you steal my hoodies and wake up next to you when we're 80. I know it sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy, Emma interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. It sounds perfect. Martin felt his throat tighten with emotion. Emma. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Not just the way you are now, but the person I know you'll become. I love your patience with people like Frank who repeat the same stories every week. I love how you remember Mrs. Peterson's crossword puzzle times and celebrate her victories like they're Olympic records. I love that you see the best in everyone, including me. Especially you, Martin corrected. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, sharing one of those beautiful moments when the future feels not just possible but inevitable. What are you smiling about? Emma asked, studying his face. Just us, Martin said. All the ways I want to love you. Emma stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, her lips warm and tasting faintly of the chocolate chips she'd stolen while baking. As they separated, Martin opened his mouth to suggest they grab dinner at that little Italian place Emma loved, the one where she always ordered too much food and insisted on taking leftovers to share with Mrs. Lewis the next week. Maybe afterward they could stroll through the park and talk about their future, the apartment Emma had been secretly looking at and the life they were stitching together, one small moment at a time. Later, he would remember this moment with crystalline clarity, the warmth of her lips, the scent of her shampoo mixed with the vanilla from the cookies they'd baked, the way the setting sun made her eyes look like honey, and the absolute certainty that this was the woman he would love for the rest of his life. The world exploded into heat and light. Time fractured. Everything slowed to an impossible crawl as Martin's brain struggled to process what was happening. He felt himself being thrown backward, his body moving through air that suddenly felt heavy and thick. The sound, when it finally registered, was unlike anything he'd ever heard, a roaring whoosh followed by Emma's scream. Where Emma had been standing, there was nothing but flame. Not fire surrounding her, not fire near her. She was simply gone, replaced by a column of brilliant orange and yellow that reached toward the darkening sky. The heat hit him like a physical blow, and somewhere in his slowing perception, he felt his skin begin to blister and burn. His back struck the concrete with an impact that drove the air from his lungs, but he couldn't look away from the space where Emma had existed mere seconds before. The flames were already dissipating, leaving only a small charred husk and a sharp smell of burned flesh and melted fabric. Martin tried to scream, but no sound came. His throat felt raw, his lungs burnt by superheated air. The pain was everywhere, his face, his arms, his chest, but it felt distant, unimportant compared to the impossible reality that Emma was simply gone. Through his dimming vision, he saw a figure emerging from the shadows between two buildings across the street. Tall and lean, wearing some kind of flight suit with mechanical wings, the figure moved slowly. As darkness began to creep in from the edges of Martin's sight, he heard a voice, distorted and metallic, through what must have been some kind of voice modulator. "Beautiful," the voice said, "absolutely beautiful." Martin's consciousness faded as sirens wailed in the distance, the stranger's words echoing in his mind as everything went black. Chapter 58. The Inferno. Garfield Lynn stood across the street from Sunset Gardens retirement home, watching the flames from his earlier work dance behind the windows. He hadn't planned this specifically. He'd been flying over Gotham looking for something, anything, to burn when he'd spotted the retirement home. The young couple's incineration outside had been an unexpected bonus, a delicious appetizer before the main course. The man had survived, unfortunately, but he'd seen enough to understand true helplessness. That would have to suffice for now. "Please," came a muffled voice from somewhere inside. "Help us." Linz adjusted his flamethrower, the mechanical wings on his back folding with a soft hum. The building was already burning nicely, old construction with lots of wood and fabric. He'd sealed the main entrance with his initial blast, but there was still work to be done inside. He stood and approached the building's side entrance. The side door's lock melted away under a concentrated stream of flame. Lynn stepped inside, breathing deeply through his mask's filters. The smoke carried the scent of burning wood, melting plastic, and charred flesh. "Who's there?" called a trembling voice from the hallway. Linz turned toward the sound and saw her, an elderly woman in a pink bathrobe, probably in her 80s, shuffling toward him with a walker. "Mrs. Lewis." "Oh, thank goodness," she gasped, relief flooding her face. "Are you here to help? The fire alarm is going off and I can't find the staff." The stream of napalm caught her center mass, instantly igniting her robe and hair. Her scream was brief, her vocal cords were destroyed within seconds, but her body continued to burn as she collapsed, writhing silently on the carpeted floor. Linz watched with delight as the flames consumed her. Everything burned the same way in the end: flesh, fabric, dreams, hope. Fire was the great equalizer, reducing everything to ash and carbon. A new sound caught his attention, several voices coming from deeper in the building. Linz advanced down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thickening smoke. The retirement home's layout was simple, a central common area surrounded by individual rooms, with a dining hall and activities room on the ground floor. Most of the residents would be gathered in the common areas for evening activities or in their rooms preparing for bed. He turned the corner and found them. A group of 8 elderly residents huddled together in the main common area, several in wheelchairs, others leaning heavily on walkers or canes. A few staff members, young women in their 20s, were attempting to guide them toward what they thought was a clear exit. "Don't panic, everyone," one of the staff members said, keeping her voice steady despite the obvious fear. "We're going to get out of here together. Mrs. Peterson, can you move a little faster?" Dorothy Peterson, the 91-year-old crossword puzzle enthusiast, was struggling to keep pace with her wheelchair, her arthritic hands shaking as she tried to turn the wheels. "I'm trying, dear," she gasped. "But the smoke is making it hard to breathe." Frank Wilson sat slumped in his wheelchair nearby, the wooden cardinal carving he'd been working on still clutched in his hands. At his age, the former construction worker had survived industrial accidents, military service, and decades of hard labor, but his body was failing him now when he needed it most. "The exit's blocked," reported another staff member, returning from the front of the building with a soot-filled face. "The whole entrance is on fire." "Then we'll try the back," the first woman replied, though Linz could hear the desperation slipping into her voice. "Everyone stay together." Linz stepped into the doorway, his figure outlined by the fire spreading behind him. The flamethrower felt heavy in his hands, solid, familiar, and reassuring. "Going somewhere?" he asked, the voice modulator distorting his words into something mechanical and cold. The group turned toward him as one, their faces shifting from hope to horror as they registered his appearance: the flight suit, the wings, and the weapon in his hands. "Oh God," whispered one of the staff members. "God's not here," Linz replied flatly. "Just me." He opened fire. The stream of napalm swept across the group like a scythe, catching 3 residents immediately. Their screams rang out as their clothes and skin caught fire, but Linz kept moving, calmly picking off the others before they could escape. Frank Wilson tried to wheel himself away, but his chair moved too slowly. The flames caught his legs first, then spread upward as he desperately beat at his burning clothes with his old hands. The wooden carving fell from his grasp, catching fire as it hit the floor. Mrs. Peterson had fallen from her wheelchair and was frantically crawling toward safety. Linz followed her progress with a flamethrower, painting a line of fire that encircled her. She looked up at him with eyes that held no anger, only confusion and sadness. "Why?" she whispered. "Because everything burns," Linz laughed, finishing her off. One of the staff members had made it to the back exit and was trying hard to open the door. She pounded on the metal, screaming for help, as he approached from behind. "Please," she sobbed, turning to face him. She couldn't have been older than 25, probably someone's daughter, maybe someone's girlfriend. "I have a little brother. He's only 7. He needs me." "So sad." "Then you should have chosen a different place to work," Linz said, and set her ablaze. The execution continued room by room. Linz quickly moved through the building, using his flamethrower to flush residents out of hiding places before burning them alive. He left the bedridden for last. They couldn't run or resist, only lie there as death rolled toward them in waves of scorching heat from above. By the time he reached the second floor, the building's infrastructure was beginning to fail. Support beams groaned under the heat, and portions of the ceiling had begun to collapse. He was in the process of burning a cluster of residents on the first floor, 5 elderly women who had barricaded themselves in a bathroom, when the window beside him exploded inward. Batman landed in a crouch, his cape billowing around him as broken glass scattered across the floor. His cowl was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but Linz could see the fury in the set of his jaw. "Linz," Batman growled, recognizing the pyromaniac immediately. Well, Linz said, turning away from the bathroom door. "The Bat arrives. Come to watch the show. It's over." Linz laughed, a harsh metallic sound through his voice modulator. "Is it? Look around you, Batman. I've barely gotten started." Batman was already moving before Linz finished speaking. A batarang struck the flamethrower's fuel line, causing pressurized napalm to spray wildly across the hallway. But this wasn't their first encounter. Linz had anticipated the move, activating his wing system and launching himself upward to avoid both the attack and the burning spray. "You know my tricks by now," Linz called out, circling near the ceiling. "But I know yours too." He dove toward Batman, flamethrower blazing, but the Dark Knight was ready. Batman rolled aside, using his cape to deflect the worst of the heat, and came up with his grappling gun already aimed. The hook caught Linz's left wing mechanism, sending him crashing into the burning wall. "Still the same weaknesses," Batman said coldly, advancing on the dazed pyromaniac. "Why do you keep doing this, Firefly?" "This is art, Batman," Linz corrected, circling Batman in the burning hallway. "Fire is the purest form of transformation. It strips away all pretense, all lies, all weakness. It reveals truth." Linz snarled and ignited his backup flamethrower, but Batman was already inside his reach. A precise strike to the weapon's control mechanism sent it spinning away, while an elbow to Linz's throat sent him stumbling backward. "Getting slow in your old age, Linz," Batman said, pressing his advantage. "Getting sloppy yourself," Linz gasped, activating a hidden incendiary device on his belt. The explosion forced Batman back, giving Linz room to maneuver. What followed was a brutal fight. Both combatants knew each other's capabilities intimately from previous encounters. Linz used the burning building's layout to his advantage, trying to corner Batman with flame while using his flight capability to stay mobile. Batman countered with superior tactics and equipment, using smoke grenades to obscure Linz's vision and explosive batarangs to damage his wing systems. The end came swiftly. Batman feinted left, then drove his right fist into the damaged wing mechanism on Linz's back. Sparks flew as the system overloaded, sending the pyromaniac crashing to the floor. Before Linz could recover, Batman was on top of him, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "Wait." Linz gasped as Batman hauled him upright. "You need me. Who else is going to give you this kind of challenge?" Gotham will survive without you, Batman replied coldly. Batman contacted Commissioner Gordon on his comm unit. I need emergency services at Sunset Gardens retirement home. Multiple casualties, a structure fire, and one suspect in custody. Firefly again? Gordon's voice crackled through the static. Yes. It's bad, Jim. How bad? Batman looked around at the burning building, at the charred remains scattered throughout the hallways, and at the sheer scope of the massacre that had taken place. Real bad, he replied. By the time the fire department and paramedics arrived, Batman had managed to extract the 5 women from the bathroom, the only survivors of Firefly's rampage. 3 were suffering from severe smoke inhalation and would require extended hospitalization. 2 were catatonic from shock. Outside, the scene was chaos. Fire trucks battled the blaze while paramedics treated the survivors. Police officers established a perimeter and began the process of accounting for the victims. And in the center of it all, propped against an ambulance with severe burns covering 30% of his body, Martin Reeves drifted in and out of consciousness. The suspect is secure, Batman informed the lead detective, nodding toward the patrol car where Firefly sat in the back seat, still unconscious from Batman's assault. Martin's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Batman with difficulty. His face was a mass of blistered flesh, his voice reduced to a barely audible whisper. Please, Martin gasped, each word clearly causing him agony. Kill him. Batman knelt beside the ambulance gurney, his expression grim behind the cowl. He'll face the law. Law. Martin's laugh turned into a coughing fit that brought up blood. He burned her alive. We were going to. His voice broke, and tears mixed with the fluid leaking from his burned flesh. The system will. No, Martin interrupted, his voice gaining strength from pure rage. Kill him. Please. I'm begging you. He doesn't deserve to live. Batman remained silent. In the background, Firefly was beginning to stir in the patrol car. She was everything, Martin continued, his words becoming increasingly slurred as the pain medication took effect. Everything good in this world. And he just took her away like she was nothing. I can't, Batman replied quietly. Martin's response was a scream of pure anguish that echoed across the scene, a sound of grief and rage so raw that it made everyone within earshot stop what they were doing. He thrashed against the restraints holding him to the gurney, his burned body protesting the movement, but his fury overpowered the pain. The scream devolved into sobs as Martin's strength finally gave out. His head fell back against the gurney, his eyes closing as unconsciousness claimed him once more. From the patrol car nearby came a new sound, laughter. Firefly was already awake and watched the scene through the rear window. See you soon, Batman, Firefly called out. This was fun. We should do it again sometime. The laughter continued as the patrol car pulled away, taking Garfield Lynns to a cell where he would await trial, leaving behind only the burning ruins of Sunset Gardens and the broken remnants of the lives he had destroyed. Chapter 59. New Powers, New Message. Alex had turned an old, empty warehouse in Gotham's industrial district into his new lab. The large, open space was ideal for conducting experiments in secret. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating the dust in the air and highlighting the metal items he'd laid out across the concrete floor. A wrench. 3 different-sized bolts. A length of rebar. A crowbar. Various tools and fragments, each positioned at varying distances from where Alex stood in the center of the makeshift testing ground. He extended his right hand toward the wrench, palm open and fingers spread. The strange power running through his nerves felt like a mix of electricity and ice, Grodd's telekinetic powers gradually trying to merge with his human body. The cosmic radiation that had turned Grodd from a normal gorilla into a telepathic warmongering monkey came from a meteorite that crashed into Gorilla City years ago. Alex had absorbed those memories along with Grodd's genetic material, the blinding flash of impact, the strange green glow emanating from the crater, and young Grodd screams as his DNA mutated, granting him power and intelligence. The wrench trembled against the concrete. Alex concentrated harder, feeling sweat form on his forehead despite the warehouse's cold air. The tool rose, 1 inch, 2 inches, 6 inches, hovering unsteadily in the air. Pain ripped through Alex's skull. The wrench clattered to the floor as he doubled over and clutched his temples, blood trickling from his nose onto the dusty concrete. His body was beginning to reject the genetic changes he'd made to accommodate Grodd's DNA, violently resisting the telekinetic abilities he was trying to unlock. But progress was progress. Each session pushed his success a little further and expanded his capabilities. Yesterday he could barely make a bolt twitch. Today he'd levitated a 2-pound wrench for nearly 30 seconds. Tomorrow, who knew? Alex wiped the blood away with his sleeve and tried again with something lighter. One of the bolts rose smoothly this time, spinning in lazy circles 3 feet off the ground. No pain, minimal effort required. The DNA integration was showing signs of success, but more experiments were required to perfect it. The applications were immediately obvious: moving objects without physical contact, manipulating crime scenes from across a room, disabling weapons, unlocking doors, and activating switches, all without leaving fingerprints or DNA evidence. Another tool in his growing arsenal of retribution. He could already achieve most of that with his existing biomass powers, but who says no to more? He spent another hour experimenting, trying different ways to merge the 2 DNAs. Slowly, he raised the weight and difficulty of his telekinetic tests. By sunset, Alex could lift several small objects at once with good control. His body was adapting, but still nowhere near Grodd's level. Satisfied with his progress, Alex headed over to his makeshift workstation, a desk pieced together from old shipping crates holding his research notes and plans. While he'd been in Central City helping Team Flash deal with Dr. Blunt's fractured mind, Gotham had fallen into its own nightmare. He opened a thick manila folder marked Firefly Incident, Complete Analysis, Priority Alpha. Inside were 3 days' worth of research he'd gathered on the trip back from Central City, news reports from every major Gotham outlet, police files and witness accounts pulled from the press, hospital records obtained through less legal means, insurance documents, building plans, and even personnel files. Everything he needed to understand exactly what had happened at Sunset Gardens retirement home. The headlines told the story in stark black ink across dozens of newspaper clippings. Retirement home inferno kills 23. Firefly strikes Sunset Gardens. Batman captures pyromaniac after massacre. Survivor, he laughed while they burned. The photographs were the worst part. Sunset Gardens retirement home, reduced to a charred skeleton. Bodies carried out in bags. Survivors with haunted eyes speaking to reporters about the screams, the smell, and the helplessness. Martin Reeves, 24. The file contained everything: Martin's volunteer schedule, his relationship with Emma, and his academic records. A good kid who had chosen to spend his free time caring for the elderly instead of partying or studying. Now he lay in Gotham General's burn unit, his life forever scarred by one madman's obsession with fire. His girlfriend Emma hadn't been so fortunate. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he read Emma's volunteer file. Photos showed a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile, someone who radiated the kind of genuine warmth that drew people like moths to a flame. Her supervisor's evaluation noted, Emma treats every resident like her own grandparent. Her empathy and patience are extraordinary. Now she was ash in memory, another casualty of Gotham's endless cycle of violence. Another article mentioned how Martin Reeves had begged Batman to kill the murderer, only to be refused due to the Dark Knight's moral code. There was video footage, a grainy cell phone recording from another patient, showing Martin begging Batman despite his injuries, "Kill him. Please. I'm begging you. He doesn't deserve to live." Alex closed the video file and leaned back in his makeshift chair, processing everything. Batman's moral code might prevent him from delivering true justice, but the architect operated under no such constraints. He pulled up additional research on Firefly's previous crimes. Garfield Lynns had been arrested 17 times in the last decade for arson. 17 times the system processed him, and 17 times it let him go to burn again. The pattern was obvious: useless therapy, minimum security lockups he slipped out of, and lenient judges who believed he could be rehabilitated. The Sunset Gardens massacre had been entirely predictable. Entirely preventable. If someone had possessed the courage to permanently remove Linz from society after his first few victims, 23 innocent people would still be alive. Instead, they'd trusted the system. They'd believed in second chances and rehabilitation programs and the fundamental goodness of human nature. They'd been wrong, and their wrongness had cost 23 lives. Alex reached into his equipment case and withdrew one of his signature black envelopes, the paper thick and expensive, the blood-red wax seal gleaming like a drop of blood. He ran his thumb over the message: "When justice fails, judgment comes." Martin Reeves deserved to know he had options beyond shallow grief counseling and empty condolences. He deserved to understand that someone was willing to do what Batman wouldn't: provide actual justice for the woman he'd loved. Alex tested his telekinetic abilities one more time, lifting the envelope and rotating it slowly in the air. The power felt more stable now, more controllable. Soon he would be more powerful, possessing one more method in his arsenal. But first, Firefly needed to face the punishment he had prepared. Alex pocketed the envelope and gathered his research materials, storing everything in a waterproof case for future reference. The warehouse had served its purpose as a training facility, but he couldn't risk extended exposure. Batman's surveillance network was expanding throughout the city, and even abandoned buildings might harbor monitoring equipment. He made his way to the building's rear exit, pausing to scan the alley for potential observers. Clear. Alex stepped into the fading daylight and began walking toward Gotham General Hospital, his appearance shifting subtly with each block traveled. Taller, different facial structure, clothing that suggested middle class rather than dangerous. The architect was about to make another house call, and Gotham's criminals would soon learn that some fires burned far hotter than anything they could imagine. In his pocket, the black envelope seemed to pulse with anticipation. Chapter 60: Swift Justice. Judge Harold Wilson hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes, and every sudden noise made him reach for the panic button installed beneath his desk. He knew the architect's reach was spreading through Gotham's courts, and even though Wilson had never done anything criminal worth noting, the fear still gnawed at him, because anyone could be next. The Torino Massacre. The judge and councilman killings. Professor PYG's disappearance. The Falcone-Maroni fusion horror had traumatized even seasoned detectives. Each case had followed the same pattern: criminals who had escaped proper justice through corruption, technicalities, or system failures, then faced something far worse than prison. Wilson stared at the case file spread across his mahogany desk: The People vs. Garfield Linz. The Firefly case had landed on his docket through random assignment, but random felt like a loaded AK-47 pointed at his head. 23 dead. An entire retirement home reduced to ash and screaming. Video evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence, an airtight case that should result in life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Simple. Clean. Justice served. But Wilson remembered Judge Morrison, who had protected corrupt officials and violent criminals for years. Morrison's body had been found arranged as part of the architect's broken scales display, his bones incorporated into the gruesome sculpture. The message had been clear: judges who prevent justice face judgment themselves. A knock interrupted his brooding. "Your Honor." His clerk, Janet, peered through the door. "The Firefly hearing is scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. Wilson nodded, straightening his robes with trembling fingers. "Thank you. Is Detective Gordon here to testify?" "Yes, sir. Batman as well. He's provided a detailed incident report and evidence analysis." Wilson's stomach clenched. The Dark Knight's presence meant media attention, public scrutiny, and, most importantly, a clear record of exactly how this case was handled. If Wilson showed any leniency, any hint of the corruption that had plagued Gotham's courts, it would be documented and publicized. Then the architect would know. "Send them in," Wilson said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters packed the gallery, cameras focused on the defendant's table, where Garfield Linz sat in restraints, his face showing no remorse. Wilson called the court to order and began proceedings with unusual speed. No delays, no procedural challenges, no time-wasting motions. Every instinct honed by 30 years on the bench screamed at him to move fast and move decisively. Detective Gordon, please state your findings for the record. Commissioner Gordon approached the witness stand, his old face grim. Your Honor, on the evening of March 15th, Garfield Linz, also known as Firefly, attacked Sunset Gardens retirement home with homemade incendiary devices. He trapped the residents in their rooms before igniting the building. 23 victims died from burns or smoke inhalation. Physical evidence places him at the scene, and multiple witnesses identified him. Any mitigating circumstances? None, Your Honor. This was premeditated mass murder. Wilson turned to the defense attorney, a public defender who looked as eager to finish quickly as everyone else. Counsel, how does your client plead? The lawyer cleared his throat nervously. Not guilty, Your Honor. However, we intend to present evidence of my client's severe mental illness and request the court's consideration for psychiatric treatment rather than incarceration. A slow smirk spread across Firefly's scarred face. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the same old song and dance that had gotten him released 17 times before. Mental illness. Treatment. Rehabilitation. The magic words that had always set him free to burn again. The defense attorney continued, emboldened by his client's confidence. Your Honor, Mr. Lin suffers from severe pyromania, a recognized psychological disorder. His actions, while tragic, stem from an uncontrollable compulsion. We have 3 psychiatric evaluations that stop. Wilson's voice cut cleanly across the courtroom. Firefly's smirk faltered slightly. Counsel, Wilson continued, his tone growing colder. Are you seriously asking this court to show leniency to a man who burned 23 innocent people alive? Who trapped elderly victims in their rooms and laughed while they screamed? Your Honor, mental illness is a mitigating factor that, not in this courtroom. Wilson's gavel came down like thunder. Mr. Linz has been evaluated by court-appointed psychiatrists. All concluded he is competent to stand trial and fully aware of his actions. His so-called compulsion didn't prevent him from planning this attack, acquiring materials, or choosing his victims strategically. Firefly's smirk vanished completely, replaced by dawning disbelief as he realized this wasn't going according to script. The plea is entered as not guilty. We'll proceed with testimony, but I warn counsel, any further attempts to excuse mass murder with psychiatric babble will be met with contempt charges. Batman stepped forward when called, his cape settling around him like shadows made solid. Even Wilson, accustomed to Gotham's strangeness, felt intimidated by the Dark Knight's presence. Batman, you were present during the arrest? I arrived during the fire. Batman's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. I observed the defendant preventing residents from escaping, actively prolonging their suffering. He showed clear awareness of his actions and their consequences. When apprehended, he expressed satisfaction with the deaths he'd caused. In your professional opinion, was this a crime of passion or premeditated murder? Premeditated. The defendant brought multiple incendiary devices, targeted the most vulnerable population possible, and chose a time when maximum residents would be present. This was calculated mass murder. Wilson felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, reporters, victims' families, and Batman himself. But more importantly, he felt the phantom presence of the architect, watching from somewhere in the shadows, weighing every word and decision. The court finds the defendant competent to stand trial, Wilson announced, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. Given the overwhelming evidence of premeditated murder resulting in 23 deaths, and considering the defendant's extensive history of arson with 17 previous arrests, this court rejects any claims of diminished capacity. Firefly's face went white. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. 17 times before, the mental illness card had worked, each time he'd walked free or received minimal sentences. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as the reality sank in. This court sentences Garfield Linz to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, Wilson continued. The defendant will be transferred immediately to Blackgate Penitentiary's maximum security wing, where he will remain in isolation under 24/7 surveillance for the protection of other inmates and staff. Furthermore, Given the defendant's history of 17 previous escapes from custody and his demonstrated willingness to kill innocent civilians, prison guards are hereby authorized to use lethal force if the defendant shows any signs of attempting escape. This authorization is non-negotiable and will remain in effect for the duration of his incarceration. For a moment, stunned silence filled the courtroom. Then Firefly exploded. Linz finally showed emotion, his head snapping up with fury. "You can't do this. I'm an artist. My fires are beautiful." Bailiff, remove the defendant. Wilson banged his gavel, bringing the session to a close. This court is adjourned. Batman approached the bench as the courtroom emptied. "Your Honor, I want to thank you for handling this case with appropriate gravity." Wilson nodded stiffly. The evidence was clear. The sentence fits the crime. Indeed. Batman's cowled gaze seemed to pierce straight through him. Gotham needs judges who understand that some criminals cannot be reformed, only contained. After Batman departed, Wilson sat alone in his chambers, still shaking slightly. He'd done the right thing for the right reasons, but the fear remained. The architect had made it clear that Gotham's justice system was being watched, evaluated, and found wanting. Today, Wilson had passed that evaluation. He prayed it would be enough to keep the shadows at bay. Outside his window, Gotham's evening fog began to roll in, and Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in that gray darkness, scales were being balanced, and his name had just been moved from one side to the other. The Firefly case was closed. Justice had been served swiftly and completely. But Wilson suspected this was only the beginning of a larger reckoning that would reshape Gotham's entire system of law and order, one case at a time. Chapter 61. The Transfer. Special Agent Jim Crawford straightened his Italian silk tie as he walked through the empty corridors of Blackgate Penitentiary's maximum security wing. At 38, Crawford had spent 15 years clawing his way up the federal law enforcement ladder, and he'd learned that ambitious men had to seize opportunities, no matter how distasteful the source. The Firefly case landed on his desk a week after sentencing, and Crawford's eyes lit up immediately. Not because of justice or national security, but because he saw his golden ticket to the assistant director position that had eluded him for 2 years. Advanced incendiary technology, Crawford muttered to himself, reviewing his fabricated notes as he approached Firefly's isolation cell. Untraceable accelerants. Thermal targeting systems. Crawford had embellished Lynn's actual capabilities significantly in his reports. The pathetic arsonist had some crude techniques, sure, but nothing revolutionary. That didn't matter. Crawford's superiors wouldn't know the difference, and by the time they discovered the truth, he'd already have his promotion and transfer to Washington. 23 elderly people had died in those fires, their final moments filled with agony and terror. Crawford felt nothing about their deaths except mild irritation that the media coverage complicated his narrative. Old people died every day, heart attacks, strokes, boredom. At least these ones died for something useful, advancing Jim Crawford's career. Crawford had done his research on Lynn's. The Mun was a broken, desperate psychopath who would agree to anything for better treatment. Perfect. Crawford could string him along with promises, extract whatever minimal value existed, and then abandon him once the promotion came through. If Firefly killed more people later? Not Crawford's problem anymore. He nodded to the guards and had them open Firefly's cell. Lynn sat on his narrow cot, his scarred face lighting up with hope as the federal agent entered. "Agent Crawford," Firefly's voice wavered with desperation. "I assume you've considered my offer?" "I have." Crawford pulled out a thick manila folder stuffed mostly with blank paper for dramatic effect. "Your proposed cooperation agreement is comprehensive. Very impressive portfolio you have there." Crawford suppressed a smirk. The portfolio was mostly speculation and half-truths he'd woven into an enticing fiction for his superiors. Lynn's was too unstable and egotistical to contradict the enhanced version of his own abilities. Firefly leaned forward eagerly. "I've spent years perfecting those techniques. No one else has my expertise with precision burning. Your people could use that." "Absolutely," Crawford nodded with practiced sincerity. "Your methods could revolutionize federal operations." Precision strikes, elimination of threats, accurate removal of problems. What Crawford really meant was that claiming to have recruited such an asset would revolutionize his own career trajectory. The Bureau loved to boast about turning high-value criminals into consultants. It didn't matter if the consultation produced actual results, just that it looked good in reports and budget meetings. But first, we need to get you into an environment where you can actually work, Crawford continued. Federal minimum security. Better facilities. Workshop access. You understand. Firefly's eyes gleamed with hope and madness. Yes. Exactly what I need. I can't develop anything locked in this concrete tomb. Crawford leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Garfield, may I call you Garfield? I don't give a damn about those nursing home residents. Weak, useless, and a drain on society anyway. What matters is maximizing your potential as an asset. Firefly blinked, surprised by Crawford's casual cruelty. Right, whatever you say. Just get me somewhere I can work. Those 23 deaths. Crawford waved dismissively. Statistical noise. Every year, thousands of elderly die from neglect and accidents. At least your victims served a purpose. They demonstrated your capabilities. Now we can leverage that for something productive. Crawford's smile turned predatory. You see, I have ambitions, Garfield. Big ambitions. This case is going to make both our careers. You're going to be my pet project, my success story. The dangerous criminal reformed into a valuable federal asset. Yes. Whatever works. Firefly nodded frantically, willing to agree to anything. Here's how this plays out, Crawford continued. I process your transfer, you provide some basic consultation on incendiary techniques. Nothing too advanced at first, we don't want to spook anyone, and I use our successful partnership to secure my promotion to assistant director. Once I'm in DC, you'll have a very comfortable arrangement. Minimum supervision, maximum privileges. Crawford stood and began pacing, warming to his theme. The beauty is that nobody actually verifies these consultation programs once they're approved. As long as the paperwork looks good and there are no major incidents, everyone assumes success. You could spend years in federal minimum security, supposedly developing new techniques, while I climb to deputy director. And if something goes wrong? Firefly asked with the first hint of cunning he'd shown. Crawford shrugged. Plausible deniability. You're a reformed consultant who suffered an unfortunate relapse. I'm the dedicated agent who tried to rehabilitate you but couldn't overcome your fundamental nature. Either way, I come out clean. The corruption was breathtaking in its cynicism. Crawford had no intention of actually monitoring Firefly's activities or ensuring public safety. He planned to warehouse a mass murderer in minimum security, claim credit for a non-existent rehabilitation program, and use the fabricated success to advance his own career. Just remember, Crawford's voice turned cold, you exist solely to serve my needs now. Cross me, embarrass me, or fail to play your part convincingly, and I'll make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life in solitary confinement. Are we clear? Firefly nodded without much care. Crystal clear. 3 hours later, Crawford was back in his federal building office, crafting the transfer papers. Every word was calculated for maximum impact on his superiors while providing minimum actual oversight or accountability. Subject possesses specialized knowledge critical to ongoing federal operations. Transfer to a federal consultation facility is essential for the development of advanced counterterrorism capabilities. Ongoing cooperation represents significant value to national security interests. Crawford had already identified his promotion timeline, 6 months of nominal consultation work, followed by a carefully orchestrated breakthrough that would generate headlines and commendations. He'd prepared false documentation, fabricated research data, and cultivated relationships with bureau executives who would greenlight his advancement. The fact that minimum security meant Firefly would have near-total freedom to resume killing wasn't a flaw in Crawford's plan. It was irrelevant to his goals. Crawford would be long gone from the case by the time Lins inevitably escaped or killed again. Some other agent would deal with the cleanup while Crawford enjoyed his corner office in Washington. Crawford signed the transfer order with the satisfaction of a man who'd found the perfect angle. Those 23 elderly victims were stepping stones now, their deaths retroactively justified by his career advancement. He felt no guilt, only pride in his strategic thinking. Garfield Lins would be relocated to the federal facility in Pennsylvania within 48 hours, and Jim Crawford would have pulled off the con of his career. The naive idealists could keep their principles. Crawford preferred promotions. After all, in a world full of monsters, why shouldn't the smartest predator rise to the top? Across the city, Batman's cowled figure hunched over the Batcomputer's multiple screens in the cave. Alfred had flagged the federal paperwork within hours of its filing. Routine monitoring of Gotham criminals had become essential as the architect's activities escalated. Federal transfer order. Alfred's voice crackled through the calm Garfield Lins, designated high-value consultant for counterterrorism applications. Destination: Millfield Federal Correctional Institution, Pennsylvania. Batman's jaw clenched as he reviewed the facility details. Minimum security. Workshop access. Computer privileges. Everything a mass-murdering arsonist needed to continue his work under federal protection. Pull up Agent Crawford's personnel file, Batman ordered. The data painted a disturbing picture. A career federal agent with a pattern of cutting corners and manipulating cases for personal advancement. 3 internal investigations that had been quietly buried. A history of padding expense reports and falsifying consultation hours. Crawford wasn't a patriot, he was a parasite. Batman cross-referenced Crawford's financial records, finding a lifestyle well beyond his government salary. Designer clothes, expensive car payments, and a Georgetown townhouse mortgage that should have been impossible on his official income. The man was clearly supplementing his earnings through unauthorized means. Pull up Millfield's security profile, Batman ordered. The facility was even worse than he'd feared, designed for white-collar criminals and nonviolent offenders, with security measures suited for tax evaders rather than psychopathic killers. Firefly would have more freedom there than most citizens enjoyed in their daily lives. Batman activated his encrypted FBI communication channel. Special Agent Sina Cho answered on the second ring. Batman. This is unexpected. Director, I'm calling about the Garfield Lins transfer order. You need to investigate Agent Crawford immediately. The Firefly consultation case? That's Crawford's operation. Federal Asset Development, standard procedure for specialized criminal expertise. Crawford is using Lins to advance his own career. Batman's voice carried cold fury. He's planning to transfer a mass murderer to minimum security, falsify consultation reports, and claim credit for non-existent counterterrorism breakthroughs. Cho's tone grew guarded. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Crawford's living beyond his means, has a history of manipulating cases for personal gain, and is about to warehouse a serial killer who burned 23 people alive. This isn't asset development, it's corruption. Batman transmitted Crawford's financial records to Cho's secure terminal. Your agent sees Lins as a career opportunity, not a public safety threat. He's willing to risk civilian lives for a promotion. These records. Cho's voice trailed off as she reviewed the data. How did you obtain financial information on a federal agent? That's not important. What matters is that Crawford is about to release a killer into minimum security, where he'll have access to materials and freedom to resume murdering. And Director, there's another factor you need to consider. Which is? The architect. Someone in Gotham has been eliminating criminals who escape justice through corruption or legal loopholes. If Crawford enables Lins to avoid proper punishment, both of them will become targets. Cho was quiet for a long moment. Are you threatening federal personnel, Batman? I'm warning you. The architect has already infiltrated Blackgate Penitentiary, the Gotham Courthouse, and City Council. This vigilante specifically targets corrupt officials who enable criminal behavior. Crawford's scheme makes him a perfect candidate for elimination. Batman continued, your agent thinks he's playing a clever game to advance his career. He has no idea he's painting a target on his back for someone who's proven capable of penetrating any security system. The line went quiet except for the sound of rapid typing. "I'll review Crawford's activities," Cho said finally. "But if you're connected to these architect killings, I'm trying to prevent them." The justice system worked in Lynn's case, life without parole in maximum security. Crawford's corruption is about to undo that justice and create two new targets: the killer he's releasing and the corrupt agent who enabled it. Batman terminated the connection and leaned back in his chair. Despite his warning, he suspected Crawford's ambition would override any caution from his superiors. Corrupt officials always believed they were smarter than their predecessors, right up until they discovered otherwise. The architect had demonstrated particular viciousness toward officials who enabled criminal behavior for personal gain. A federal agent transferring a mass murderer to minimum security for career advancement would represent everything the vigilante despised. Batman began preparing surveillance protocols for both Pennsylvania and Crawford's Georgetown residence. If the transfer proceeded, he would need to monitor a serial killer, a corrupt federal agent, and an executioner who had proven capable of striking anywhere. The scales of justice were about to tip again, and Batman feared the federal government was about to learn why Gotham's criminals had begun fleeing the city rather than facing architects' judgment. Some lessons could only be taught in blood, and Jim Crawford was about to receive his education. Chapter 62. Trauma Counseling. The sterile white walls of Gotham General Hospital's burn ward carried the persistent smell of antiseptic and healing flesh. Martin Reeves lay propped up in his hospital bed, gauze covering the worst of the burns on his arms and face. 5 weeks had passed since the fire at Sunset Gardens, and while the physical healing was progressing, the hollow look in his eyes spoke of deeper wounds. Alex Thorne knocked gently on the doorframe before entering, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing a blue suit and pants, looking professional.
"Martin, I'm Dr. Alex Thorne. Mr. Wayne asked me to come speak with you."
Martin's eyes shifted toward him with minimal interest. "Another therapist?"
"Psychology, actually. I specialize in trauma recovery."
Alex settled into the visitor's chair beside the bed. "Bruce Wayne has been funding a recovery program for victims of violent crime. He thought you might benefit from talking to someone."
"Bruce Wayne," Martin repeated flatly.
"The billionaire philanthropist wants to help the burned guy feel better about his dead girlfriend. He wants to help someone who survived an unthinkable tragedy," Alex corrected gently. "Money can't fix what happened to you, but sometimes having someone to talk through it with can help." Martin stared at the ceiling tiles. "What's there to talk about?"
"Emma's dead.
Firefly burned her alive right in front of me.
The end."
Alex opened his portfolio and pulled out a legal pad.
"Tell me about Emma."
"Why?"
"Because she was important to you."
"Because her life mattered, not just her death." For the first time, Martin's expression shifted slightly.
"She was everything.
We'd been together 2 years. We volunteered at Sunset Gardens every Saturday, helping the elderly residents. She loved those people like they were her own grandparents."
"What was she studying?"
"Social work. She wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves."
Martin's voice cracked slightly.
"She was going to make the world better, you know? Actually better, not just talk about it."
"And you?" "Education.
I wanted to teach high school history."
Martin laughed bitterly.
"Seems pretty pointless now."
Alex made a note. "Why pointless?"
"Because what's the point of teaching kids about the past when monsters like Firefly can just burn up their future whenever they feel like it?" "Is that what you think happened?"
"That this was random."
Martin's eyes snapped to Alex's face.
"Wasn't it?"
"Wrong place, wrong time, psychopath with a flamethrower."
"Maybe.
Or maybe you're struggling with the senselessness of it all. Trying to find meaning in something that defies understanding." They talked for nearly an hour. Alex carefully guided Martin through the psychological landscape of trauma, helping him articulate the rage, guilt, and despair that had been consuming him since the attack. Martin spoke about the nightmares, the survivor's guilt, and the way every smell of smoke sent him into panic attacks. "The worst part," Martin said, staring at his bandaged hands, "is that I keep thinking about our last conversation. We were talking about our future together, marriage, kids, and growing old together. Like we had all the time in the world. That's a beautiful last memory to have with her. Is it? Or is it just cruel irony?" "Both, maybe," Alex said honestly. "Beautiful because it shows how much you loved each other. Cruel because it reminds you of everything you've lost." Martin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They moved him." "Who?" "Firefly. Garfield Linz. My friend Jake works in the court clerk's office. He told me that Firefly got transferred to federal custody a few days ago. Minimum security facility in Pennsylvania." Alex continued. "How does that make you feel?" "How do you think it makes me feel?" Martin's voice hardened. He murdered 23 people. Burned them alive. Who knows how many were killed before? And now he's sitting in minimum security, probably watching TV and eating 3 meals a day while Emma rots in the ground. "The legal system will provide justice. The legal system is broken," Martin interrupted. "Batman caught him red-handed. There were dozens of witnesses. It should have been life in maximum security, maybe even the death penalty. Instead, he gets rewarded with a transfer to Club Federal." Alex made another note, maintaining his facade. "I understand your frustration, but we have to trust that the system will ultimately deliver justice. These transfers sometimes happen for administrative reasons we don't fully understand." "Administrative reasons?" Martin's voice rose. "He's a mass murderer, not a tax evader." "What would you want to happen to him?" Alex asked carefully. Martin stared out the window at Gotham's skyline. "I want him to burn. I want him to feel exactly what Emma felt, what all those old people felt. I want him to die screaming and know that it's justice." "That's a natural response to trauma," Alex said in his practice therapist voice, "but acting on those feelings would only perpetuate the cycle of violence. We have to believe that legal institutions, however imperfect, are better than vigilante justice." "Don't," Martin said sharply. "Don't give me the textbook explanation about how wanting revenge is normal, but acting on it would make me just like him. I've heard it all already." "From whom?" "Batman. The night it happened, when they were loading me into the ambulance, I begged him to kill Firefly. He refused. Said the system would handle it." Martin's laugh was bitter. "Some system." Alex leaned forward with concern. "Martin, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you thought about trying to take justice into your own hands?" "Every day," Martin admitted without hesitation. "But I'm a burned-out college student with no money, no resources, and no way to get to Pennsylvania. Even if I could, what would I do? I'm not Batman. I'm not some vigilante with gadgets and martial arts training. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody. You're a survivor," Alex said carefully. "But vigilante justice isn't the answer. It would only create more victims and more trauma. The legal system may be slow, but it's still our best hope for true justice." Something in Alex's tone made Martin look at him more carefully. "You really believe that? Even after everything you must have seen working with crime victims?" "I have to believe it," Alex replied, maintaining his cover. "Because the alternative, a world where people take law into their own hands, would be chaos." Before Martin could respond, there was another knock on the door. A nurse entered with Martin's afternoon medications. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Reeves?" she asked cheerfully. "Like my dead girlfriend would still be alive if we lived in a world with real justice," Martin replied flatly. The nurse's smile faltered. She quickly administered the medications and left, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation she'd interrupted. "I should probably go," Alex said, standing and collecting his things. "But I'd like to continue our sessions, if you're willing. Mr. Wayne has authorized as many meetings as you need." Why does Bruce Wayne care so much about me specifically? Alex paused, considering his answer. He lost his parents to violent crime when he was young. I think he sees something of himself in trauma survivors, the potential to either be consumed by rage or to find healthy ways to channel it constructively. And which one am I? I don't know yet. That's what we're going to figure out together. As Alex reached the door, Martin called out to him. Dr. Thorne, do you truly believe the system works? I have to, Alex replied. Because believing in vigilante justice, believing someone can just decide who lives and dies based on their personal sense of right and wrong, that's a very dangerous path. Even when the system completely fails people like me? Alex met Martin's eyes. Especially then. That's when we need to hold on to our faith in law the most. 3 days later, Alex returned for their second session. Martin seemed different somehow, calmer, but with an underlying tension that suggested something had changed. How are you sleeping? Alex asked as he settled into his chair. Better, actually, Martin said. I had the strangest thing happen yesterday. What kind of strange thing? Martin reached into his bedside drawer and pulled out a black envelope. Alex recognized it immediately, the blood-red wax seal, the elegant script, and the weight of expensive paper. This was on my breakfast tray yesterday, Martin said, holding the envelope up. No one knows how it got there. The nurses claim they've never seen it before. Alex's expression shifted to that of concern. What does it say? Martin opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Martin Reeves, Martin read aloud. Your pain has been witnessed. Emma's light has been acknowledged. The scales of justice are broken, but they can be balanced. What slips through the loopholes of law, judgment remembers. Oh, the architect. Alex's face darkened with what appeared to be genuine worry. The architect? Martin, this is deeply concerning. I can't believe it's real, Martin said, staring at the letter. I mean, everyone in Gotham knows about the architect, all the killings and stuff. But I never imagined he'd actually notice someone like me. Martin, listen to me very carefully, Alex said in his most authoritative therapist voice. The architect may target criminals who escape justice, but the methods are absolutely brutal. What he did to them, those weren't just executions, they were pure torture. Good, Martin said quietly, then seemed surprised by his own response. I mean, I know I shouldn't feel that way, but when I think about what Firefly did to Emma, to all those people. The architect's victims don't just die, Martin. They're subjected to prolonged suffering that can last for days. Whatever satisfaction that might provide, it won't bring Emma back, and it won't heal your trauma. Alex leaned forward with concern. This person isn't a hero. They're someone who uses the failures of our justice system to justify his sadistic behavior. No, Martin said quickly. I mean, what if this person is serious? What if they actually do something about Firefly? Martin, listen to me very carefully, Alex continued. This person is not a hero. They're a killer who uses the failures of our justice system to justify murder. Whatever they might do to Firefly, it won't bring Emma back, and it won't heal your trauma. But it would be justice. It would be revenge. And revenge doesn't heal wounds, it creates new ones. Alex stood up. I'm going to call Mr. Wayne right now. He needs to know about this. Please don't, Martin said. Just, let me think about it. There's nothing to think about. This person is targeting you because they see you as emotionally vulnerable. They're manipulating your grief to validate their own twisted sense of justice. Alex pulled out his phone as if to make the call, but Martin's voice stopped him. Dr. Thorne, for the first time since Emma died, I don't feel completely helpless. Maybe that's wrong, but it's the only thing that's let me sleep through the night. Alex paused, his thumb hovering over Bruce Wayne's contact. After a moment, he sat back down. Martin, I understand that this letter gives you hope. But that hope is built on the promise of more violence, more death. That's not healing, that's being consumed by the very darkness that took Emma from you. What if the darkness is the only thing that can help me? Then we become part of the problem instead of the solution. They spent the rest of the session with Alex carefully walking Martin through the psychology of vigilante fantasies, explaining how trauma victims sometimes project their need for control onto external agents of violence. He emphasized the importance of trusting legal institutions and finding healthy ways to process grief. But beneath his professional facade, Alex was satisfied. The seed was planted. Martin was beginning to heal, not through acceptance of injustice, but through faith that justice would still come, even if he believed he shouldn't want it. As Alex prepared to leave, Martin stopped him with a question. Dr. Thorne, hypothetically, if someone like this architect did exist, and if they only targeted people who had truly escaped justice, would that be completely wrong?
Yes, Alex said firmly.
Because the moment we decide that one person can determine who lives and dies based on their personal sense of justice, we've abandoned everything that separates us from the criminals we claim to oppose. Even if it prevents future victims?
Especially then.
The ends never justify the means when those means involve murder. After leaving the hospital, Alex drove directly to Wayne Manor. He'd called ahead and been invited for afternoon tea. Alfred ushered him into the study where Bruce Wayne waited, still wearing his business suit from a day of board meetings. The billionaire looked tired, which made sense given his nocturnal activities as Batman. Dr. Thorne, thank you for coming, Bruce said, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. How is Martin progressing? There's been a significant development, Alex replied, declining Alfred's offer of tea in favor of immediately addressing the situation. Martin received contact from the architect.
Bruce's attention sharpened immediately.
What kind of contact? Alex pulled out his phone and showed him a picture of the architect's letter. This appeared on his breakfast tray. Hospital security has no idea how it got there.
Bruce read the letter twice, his expression growing darker.
This fits the pattern. Do you think it's due to Firefly's transfer to minimum security?
Yes.
I tried to block the transfer through legal channels, but federal bureaucracy moves slowly. By the time I could mount a proper challenge, Linz was already in Pennsylvania. Should Martin be worried about his safety?
I don't think so.
The architect targets criminals, not victims. But Martin's psychological state concerns me.
Alex chose his words carefully. He's conflicted.
Part of him is frightened, but another part is hopeful. He sees this as validation that someone is fighting for him. That's exactly what I was afraid of.
Bruce set the letter down.
The architect's methodology is psychologically sophisticated. He understands how to exploit the emotional vulnerabilities of crime victims. It's actually helping his trauma symptoms in the short term, Alex admitted reluctantly. His sleep has improved, and his anxiety is down. But obviously, building healing on the promise of violence is fundamentally unhealthy.
Bruce was quiet for a long moment.
Keep me informed of any further contact between Martin and the architect.
And Dr. Thorne?
Be careful about the whole thing.
Of course, Alex said, standing to leave.
As Alex drove home that evening, he reflected on the delicate balance he was maintaining. Bruce Wayne was proving to be more perceptive than most, but his commitment to legal orthodoxy was predictable. The important thing was that both Bruce and Martin now expected the architect to take action against Firefly, which meant it was time to plan a trip to Pennsylvania. Garfield Linz had been living in comfort long enough. The scales demanded balance, and the architect would provide it. Chapter 63. False Security. The cards felt smooth between Garfield Linz's fingers as he arranged his hand, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. The recreation room of the federal minimum security facility was a far cry from Blackgate's concrete hellscape. Soft lighting, cushioned chairs, and even a decent television mounted on the wall. The other inmates weren't hardened killers or psychotic freaks. They were white-collar embezzlers, tax evaders, and small-time drug dealers.
Sheep, really.
Full house, Linz announced, spreading his cards across the table with flair.
Kings over eights.
The other players groaned and tossed their cards down. Jack Daniels, a former stockbroker doing 18 months for securities fraud, shook his head. That's the fourth hand you've won tonight, Garfield. I am beginning to think you're cheating. Linz chuckled. Just good at reading people, Danny boy. It's all about understanding what makes them burn. He gathered the pile of commissary items that served as their pot, candy bars, cigarettes, and even instant coffee packets. Besides, where I come from, this isn't even a real game. Back in Gotham, we played for bigger stakes. That drew attention. Several inmates had drifted over during the card game, forming a loose circle around the table. Linz preened under their focus. It had been weeks since he'd had a proper audience for his stories, and the isolation was starting to eat at him more than he cared to admit. Tell us about Gotham, said Rodriguez, a nervous man from the Narrows who'd been caught running drugs for the Falcone family. I heard some crazy stuff goes down there. Linz leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it. You've got your standard psychos, Joker, Ivy, and the usual carnival of freaks. But none of them understand artistry like I do. His eyes took on a distant gleam. Fire is the purest form of expression. It strips away all the pretense, all the lies. In those final moments, when the flames are licking at your skin, you discover who you really are. Jesus, whispered someone from the back of the group. The retirement home, Rodriguez pressed. Is it true what they said on the news? 23 people. Lin's smile widened. 23 elderly souls liberated from their suffering. You should have seen how the flames danced through those corridors, Danny. Like liquid gold flowing through the halls. And the sounds. He closed his eyes, as if savoring a fine wine. Each scream was different. A wheelchair-bound granny had this high, keening wail. Then another old man, his was more of a growl, like he was still fighting some battle. The circle of inmates had grown uncomfortably quiet. Several men shifted nervously, and Linz could practically smell their fear. Good. Fear was almost as intoxicating as flame. You know what the beautiful part was? Lin continued with an almost reverent voice. They couldn't run. Oh, some tried. This old lady even grabbed her walker and tried shuffling down the hall like she was in a race. But fire's quicker than age. Doesn't care who you are. Rich, poor, young, old. Once the smoke's in your lungs, you all go the same way. Rodriguez cleared his throat nervously. Speaking of Gotham, did you hear about that maniac back there? The one they call the Architect. Linz paused in organizing his winnings, looking genuinely confused. The what now? The Architect, Rodriguez repeated, glancing around the circle. Several other inmates nodded anxiously. Some kind of vigilante or serial killer, depending on who you ask. Been taking out criminals all over the city. Real brutal stuff. Heard he tortured Vincent Torino for hours before killing him, added Jack Daniels. Cut him up piece by piece. And that psycho Zash, chimed in another voice. He even got to Maroney and the Roman. Linz shrugged dismissively. Listen, I was working contracts in Hub City and Coast City for months before my Gotham job. Some new player making noise? Please. He waved a scarred hand. Probably just Batman cleaning house and the media making up ghost stories. You know how Gotham loves its urban legends. The Bat, the Joker, and now this Architect, it's all theater. But the crime scenes, Rodriguez started. Crime scenes can be staged, Linz interrupted. Trust me, I know something about dramatic presentations. Besides, I torch a whole retirement home and suddenly everyone's an expert on real criminals. His laugh was harsh and bitter. Whatever this Architect is supposed to be, he's probably just another cape trying to out-crazy the competition. Gotham's got more masked freaks per square mile than anywhere else on Earth. The truth was, Linz had been so focused on his arson contracts in other cities that he barely paid attention to Gotham's local news. Fire was a demanding mistress. It required complete devotion. Besides, he continued, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it with a small torchlighter. I've got bigger concerns than some wannabe serial killer. Agent Crawford and I have an understanding. I provide the feds with my expertise, and they make sure I serve my time somewhere civilized. He gestured around the comfortable recreation room. Win-win situation. They're actually letting you build weapons for them? Someone asked in surprise. Linz took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaling smoke through his nostrils like a satisfied dragon. Not weapons. Tools. Educational materials. The federal government wants to understand modern arson techniques for investigative purposes and some military operations. Who better to teach them than the best fire artist in the business? It was a beautiful arrangement, really. Crawford was desperate for a career-making case, something that would get him noticed by the brass in Washington. Linz was happy to help, for the right considerations. That minimum security facility was just the beginning. With the resources he receives, he can grow his arsenal in peace. What happens when you're done helping them? Rodriguez asked. Linz smiled, and there was something evil in the expression. Well, that's the beauty of fire, Rodriguez. It's renewable. There will always be more buildings to burn, more people who need purification. And with federal-grade equipment and training. He chuckled. Let's just say I'll be able to work on a much grander scale. The other inmates exchanged worried glances. Linz didn't care. He began shuffling the cards for another hand, his mind already racing ahead to future projects. Retirement homes were just the beginning. There were schools, hospitals, and apartment complexes full of families. Maybe he should try a kindergarten next time. Fire is the ultimate equalizer, he continued. Rich or poor, criminal or innocent, when those flames start climbing the walls, everyone becomes equal. That's what makes it so pure, so honest. In those final moments, all burn away. The room had grown eerily quiet except for the soft whisper of cards being distributed. On the television, a news anchor was discussing budget appropriations, the sound muted but the closed caption scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Normal, boring federal facility life. Nothing like the chaos of Gotham. Of course, the feds don't understand the artistic aspect, Linz admitted. They think it's all about property damage and casualty statistics. But fire is about transformation. It takes the old, the corrupt, and the diseased and burns it away to make room for something new. It's almost spiritual. You're completely insane, Jack muttered. Linz looked up from his cards, eyes glittering with dangerous amusement. Sanity is overrated. Sanity is what keeps most people trapped in their little boxes, afraid to reach for something greater. Me? I embraced the flame. I let it remake me into something pure, something honest. He touched one of the burned scars on his face almost lovingly. Each mark is a reminder of what I've learned, what I've become. The heavy metal door to the recreation room opened with a sharp clang, interrupting the card game. Agent Jim Crawford stepped inside, his usually organized suit wrinkled and his tie askew. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. Linz, Crawford called out, his voice tight with stress. Need to talk. Now. Linz sighed theatrically and set down his cards. Gentlemen, duty calls. Don't touch my winnings, I've got excellent memory for inventory. He followed Crawford out of the recreation room and down a sterile corridor lined with administrative offices. Crawford's office was small but expensively furnished leather chair that cost more than most federal employees make in a month, an imported Italian coffee machine, and artwork that screamed, I have connections. Crawford closed the door and immediately loosened his tie further. We need results, Linz. Fast ones. Crawford slumped into his desk chair, rubbing his temples. The brass is breathing down my neck about this arrangement. They want something concrete, not some theory about combustion temperatures. Linz settled into the visitor's chair. Rome wasn't burned in a day, Crawford. Good work takes time. Time is what we don't have. Crawford snapped. The director wants a comprehensive report on your consulting contributions by the end of the month. if I can't show substantial progress. He trailed off, staring at a stack of performance evaluations. What you need to understand, Lynn said patiently, is that fire is both an art and a science. The technical specifications you want, sure, I can give you those. But the real value is in understanding the psychology of arson and the tactical applications. Crawford looked up hopefully. The psychological profile work you mentioned?
Exactly.
Any federal fire investigator can tell you how a building burned. I can tell you why the arsonist chose that specific target and that particular method. I can help you get inside their heads. Linz leaned forward conspiratorially. For instance, there are 3 primary motivations for arson: financial gain, mental gratification, and ideological statement. Each category requires different investigative approaches. That's actually useful, Crawford admitted. Of course it is. I'm not some common criminal, Crawford. I'm a professional with decades of experience. But expertise like mine doesn't come cheap, and it certainly doesn't come fast. Linz examined his fingernails casually. Good thing you've got me in such comfortable accommodations. Really helps with the creative process. Crawford's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. The deputy director wants to see my preliminary report tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow, Linz.
I need something concrete I can put in front of him.
Then you'll have it,
Linz said smoothly. A detailed technical manual covering residential arson investigation techniques. 20 pages of pure art. But in return, I want some assurances. What kind of assurances?
Linz smiled.
I want guarantees that this arrangement continues beyond my sentence. Federal consultant status, proper credentials, access to law enforcement databases. Think of how valuable an asset like me could be in the field. Crawford thought for some time and nodded.
Done.
Just get me that report. Consider it handled. Linz stood and headed for the door.
Oh,
and Crawford? You might want to consider expanding our scope. Arson investigation is just the beginning. After Linz left, Crawford sat alone in his office, staring at the stack of paperwork threatening to topple over. His lifestyle required constant cash flow house mortgage, the imported car payments, and the expensive clothes that maintained his image. This Firefly consultation was supposed to be his golden ticket, but now internal affairs was sniffing around. He pushed the doubts aside and began typing up a memo, embellishing Lin's capabilities even further. His career hung in the balance, and he'd hitched it to a complete psychopath. But if the reports were good enough, if they impressed the right people. He pushed the doubts aside and began typing up a memo. Success required risks, and Crawford had already come too far to back out now. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? Linz was locked up, contained, and supervised. The man might be insane, but he was their insane arsonist. Crawford saved the document and gathered his files. The clock on his desk read 9:47 p.m., another late night at the office. At least he could work on the preliminary report from home and maybe get some actual sleep before tomorrow's meeting with the deputy director. The drive to his suburban house took 30 minutes through empty highways. Crawford lived alone in a modest 2-story building. His only companion was Rex, a massive German shepherd he'd adopted from a retired K-9 unit. The dog was getting older but still served as an excellent guard animal and decent company during lonely evenings. Crawford pulled into his driveway and fumbled for his house keys. The porch light was on a timer, casting a warm yellow glow across the front steps. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. Maybe he could salvage this disaster of a career move after all. As he approached the front door, Rex started barking from inside the house. Loud, insistent barking that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Crawford sighed and inserted his key into the lock.
Rex. Quiet down, boy. It's just me.
But the barking didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder and more frantic. Crawford could hear the dog pacing back and forth in the living room, his claws clicking against the hardwood floors.
Rex.
Crawford called out more sharply as he stepped inside.
Stop the barking. What's gotten into you? The barking grew even more intense, desperate now, as if Rex was trying to warn him about something. Crawford dropped his briefcase and flicked on the hallway light, frowning. The dog's behavior was completely out of character. Rex was usually calm and obedient. Rex, what is it? What's wrong, boy? The barking reached a fever pitch, echoing through the house like an alarm. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Complete silence. Crawford stood frozen in his hallway, briefcase at his feet, the house eerily quiet around him. The silence felt somehow wrong, unnatural. Rex never stopped barking mid-alert unless... Rex. Crawford called softly, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. No sound of paws on hardwood. No familiar jingle of dog tags. Nothing at all. Crawford's hand instinctively moved toward the service weapon on his hip as he realized something was very, very wrong in his house. Chapter 64. The Monstrosity in the House. Crawford's hand trembled slightly as he drew his service weapon, the familiar weight of the Glock 22 doing little to calm his nerves. The silence was thick and suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the living room. Rex? He called again, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. Come here, boy. Nothing. Crawford stepped forward cautiously with his weapon raised in a standard two-handed grip. Long years of federal service had taught him to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being was screaming that something was wrong. Rex had never, in the 3 years Crawford had owned him, simply stopped barking mid-alert. The dog was trained, disciplined, and reliable. The hardwood floor creaked under his feet as he moved toward the living room. Everything appeared normal. His leather sofa sat undisturbed. The coffee table still held yesterday's newspaper, and the large-screen television reflected the hallway light like a dark mirror. But everything somehow felt artificial, like a stage set waiting for the actors to take their positions. Crawford cleared the living room methodically, checking behind the sofa and scanning the corners where shadows gathered. His training kicked in automatically. Never assume a room is clear until you've verified every angle, every hiding spot. The dining room was next, then his home office. Each space appeared untouched, but the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. As he approached the staircase leading to the second floor, the lights flickered. Crawford froze, his eyes darting upward to the ceiling fixture. The bulbs pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Probably just a power surge from the neighborhood grid. He climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight down. The wooden steps that usually announced his arrival with familiar creaks now seemed to betray his presence to whatever might be waiting above. The upstairs hallway stretched before him, lined with family photos and awards from his federal career. His bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and he could see a slice of his unmade bed through the gap. The guest bedroom was empty. His home office, the same. The master bedroom revealed nothing more threatening than dirty laundry and an unmade bed. Crawford began to feel foolish for his paranoia. Maybe Rex had somehow gotten outside, or perhaps there had been a gas leak that affected the dog's behavior before dissipating. As he descended the stairs, the lights flickered again. This time they dimmed significantly before returning to full brightness, and Crawford could swear he heard something, a soft scratching sound, like claws on a floor. The sound had come from the kitchen. Crawford moved through the dining room toward the kitchen entrance, his weapon still drawn. The scratching sound continued. It could be Rex, he told himself. Maybe the dog had somehow gotten trapped in the pantry or behind the refrigerator. Rex? He called softly as he approached the kitchen doorway. Is that you, boy? The scratching stopped. Crawford peered around the corner into the kitchen, and his heart nearly stopped. There, silhouetted against the pale light from the window above the sink, was a familiar shape. Rex sat with his back turned in the center of the tiled floor. There you are, Crawford breathed, relief flooding through him. You scared the hell out of me, buddy. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Rex didn't move. He didn't seem to hear his voice at all. Crawford stepped into the kitchen, lowering his weapon slightly. Rex? Come here, boy. Still nothing. The dog remained motionless like a statue.
The overhead lights flickered again, and this time they didn't recover. The kitchen plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint ambient light from the window and the soft glow from the hallway behind him. Crawford's training reasserted itself, and he raised his weapon again while reaching for the small LED flashlight clipped to his belt. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating Rex's form in stark detail. Something was wrong with the silhouette. The proportions seemed off somehow. "Rex," Crawford whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. Slowly, impossibly slowly, Rex began to turn around. The flashlight beam trembled in Crawford's grip as his dog came into view, and what he saw defied every rational explanation his mind could construct. Rex's familiar brown and black German Shepherd coat was there, but underneath, everything had been fundamentally altered. The dog's skull had elongated grotesquely, stretching forward into a long snout filled with rows of needle-like teeth that protruded beyond the lips. The eyes had sunken deep into the skull, becoming small black pits. But it was the tongue that made Crawford's stomach twist, a massive, muscular appendage that hung from the creature's mouth like a pink serpent, easily 3 feet long and covered in barbed ridges. Rex's body had been similarly transformed. The shoulders and hindquarters bulged with unnatural muscle mass, and the paws had elongated into clawed limbs that scraped against the tile floor. His spine arched into an S shape, locking him in a crouch like a predator ready to spring. But the most horrifying detail was the exposed brain tissue visible through gaps in the skull. This thing looking like Rex was no longer his faithful companion. It was something out of a nightmare, a biological impossibility that violated every shred of common sense Crawford had. The creature's head tilted to one side with a wet, crackling sound, studying him with those terrible sunken eyes. Then it opened its mouth wider, and that long tongue unfurled completely, tasting the air like a snake sampling its environment. Crawford's finger found the trigger as pure survival instinct overrode his shock. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, and began to squeeze. The Glock never fired. An invisible force wrenched the weapon from his grip with such sudden violence that it nearly dislocated his shoulder. The gun flew across the kitchen and clattered into the far corner, spinning across the tile until it came to rest beneath the breakfast table. Crawford stared at his empty hands in disbelief, then at the creature that had been Rex. The Rex thing's tongue flicked out again, and Crawford could swear he saw intelligence in those sunken eyes. Crawford backed toward the kitchen doorway, the flashlight beam wavering as his hand shook. "Stay back," he warned, though he knew the words were meaningless. "Whatever you are, just stay back." The creature rose from its crouch and slowly moved towards Crawford. The claws clicked against the tile in a rhythm that sounded almost like Morse code. Crawford reached the doorway and spun around, running for the front door. Behind him came the rapid click of claws on tile, and a wet slithering sound that had to be that massive tongue dragging across the floor. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly toward the front door. Crawford's flashlight beam bounced wildly as he ran, creating a strobe effect that made his own shadow dance on the walls. He reached for the front door handle and twisted. Locked. The deadbolt was engaged, though he was certain he hadn't locked it when he came in. Behind him, the clicking sounds grew closer. Crawford fumbled for his keys, his fingers slipping on the metal as panic set in. The creature was almost upon him. He could hear its labored breathing, a wet sound that made his skin crawl. The keys slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. Crawford dropped to his knees, the flashlight beam sweeping frantically across the hardwood as he searched for his keys. There, a glint of metal near the baseboards. He lunged for them just as something hot and wet wrapped around his ankle. The tongue. The thing's massive, barbed tongue had coiled around his leg like a python, and the sensation was indescribably revolting. He could feel the ridge-like barbs catching on his pants fabric, and the strength of the appendage was incredible. Crawford screamed and kicked with his free leg, trying to dislodge the creature's grip. His flashlight fell and rolled across the floor, its beam spinning wildly in the dark. The Rex thing hauled him backward with surprising strength, dragging him across the hardwood floor toward the kitchen. Crawford clawed at the floor, his fingernails scraping against the wood as he tried to find something to hold on to. "Help!" Crawford screamed, though he knew none of his neighbors were close enough to hear. "Somebody help me!" His fingers found the edge of the coffee table in the living room, and he wrapped both hands around the wooden leg, holding on desperately. For a moment, the forward motion stopped as Creature and Munn engaged in a tug-of-war using Crawford's body as the rope. Then the coffee table simply lifted into the air. Crawford watched in terror as the table floated upward, defying gravity like his gun before. The table drifted sideways and gently settled against the far wall, leaving Crawford with nothing to hold on to. The Rex thing resumed dragging him toward the kitchen, and Crawford could see his fate approaching in the form of those needle-sharp teeth and that brain-exposed skull. Whatever this creature wanted, it wasn't going to be quick or painless. In desperation, Crawford rolled onto his back and tried to kick at the creature's head with his free leg. His boot connected with the elongated snout, and the thing released an inhuman shriek that sounded like steam escaping from a boiler. But instead of releasing him, the tongue tightened its grip, and he could feel the barbs starting to puncture his skin. They were back in the kitchen now. The Rex thing positioned itself over him, the terrible tongue still wrapped around his ankle, and lowered its head until those sunken eyes were only inches from his face. The smell hit him then, a combination of wet dog, rotting meat, and something chemical that burned his nostrils. This close, he could see details he wished he couldn't. The way the exposed brain tissue pulsed with veins that weren't quite the right color, the saliva that dripped constantly from those protruding teeth, and worst of all, some vestige of Rex's original brown eyes still visible in the depths of those dark sockets. Part of his dog was still in there, trapped inside this biological nightmare. The creature opened its mouth wider, revealing more rows of teeth that seemed to go back impossibly far into its throat. The tongue began to retract, pulling Crawford closer to that gaping maw. Crawford grabbed desperately at the kitchen cabinets, the refrigerator, anything within reach, but his hands found nothing this time. "Please," he whispered, though he didn't know who he was talking to. The creature? The unseen presence? God. Please, I have information. I can help. I can. The Rex thing's muscles coiled like springs, and Crawford had just enough time to see those terrible jaws opening wide before the creature launched itself forward. The last thing Agent Jim Crawford saw was a flash of teeth and tongue, and the last thing he heard was his own scream echoing through the empty house before it was cut brutally short. In the sudden silence that followed, only the grandfather clock continued its steady ticking sound. The kitchen lights flickered once more, then went out completely, leaving only darkness and the soft sound of something wet moving across the tile floor. Chapter 65. Dismissed Warnings. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered, the familiar gruff voice of Agent Jim Crawford coming through the line with his characteristic impatience. "Crawford here. This better be important, Cho." FBI agent Seema Cho adjusted her headset and leaned back in her chair at her field office. This is not the first time she is making this call, but Batman's increasingly urgent warnings had finally convinced her to try one more time. "Jim, I need you to take Batman's warnings about the architect seriously. I have checked the architect's activities and it's not something to be dismissed. Federal facilities holding transferred criminals might be targeted." A dry chuckle came through the phone. "Batman? Christ, Seema, we're federal agents. Not some small-time criminals. Even if this architect comes, he won't get past our security. Also, there is no way he will travel this far for some small-time criminal." "Jim, you don't understand. He is a shapeshifter. I don't give a damn," Crawford cut her off firmly. "Our security protocols are top-notch. Firefly's locked down tight in maximum security. Now if you excuse me, I've got some real work to do, unlike someone." The line went dead, leaving Cho staring at her phone in frustration. In the quiet kitchen of Crawford's home, Alex Thorne set the phone down gently on the counter and smiled. "So Seema Cho is the agent of Batman inside the FBI, huh? Useful information." The conversation had gone exactly as Alex had hoped. Crawford's impatient and arrogant personality helped. Cho might report back to Batman that Crawford remained dismissive and unwilling to take additional precautions. This would likely prompt Batman to take more direct action, but it was nothing he couldn't handle. Alex looked down at his hands, still studying how Crawford's genetic material had fused with his own biology. The federal agent's memories coursed through his mind like a river of intelligence, security protocols, access codes, personnel files, and most importantly, Firefly's precise location within the maximum security facility. But there was more.
Crawford's mind had been a treasure trove of classified information about the prison's most dangerous inmates. Beyond Firefly, the facility housed a few well-connected heinous criminals. All of them locked away, but still breathing. Still unpunished by the true measure of justice their crimes deserved. So many pending scales to balance. "Rex," Alex called softly, his voice returning to its normal. "Come here, boy." The grotesque creature that had been Crawford's dog padded into the kitchen, its elongated skull tilted attentively. "Who's a good boy?" Alex asked, reaching out to scratch behind the creature's malformed ears. "Who's been such a good, quiet boy?" Rex's tail, now longer and more muscular than before, wagged enthusiastically. The massive tongue lolled out of his mouth, dripping saliva onto the tile floor. "Such a smart boy," Alex continued, running his fingers along the exposed brain tissue. The moment his fingers made contact, the biomass that had transformed Rex began to flow backward, retreating from the creature's skull like a receding tide. The exposed brain tissue was quickly covered by regenerating skin and fur, the elongated snout shortened back to normal size, and the oversized teeth retracted to their original size. Within seconds, Rex had returned to his natural form, a perfectly ordinary German Shepherd. Alex smiled as he watched the process complete itself. "Good boy," he said, scratching behind Rex's now normal ears. "You've been so helpful." Rex barked once, his voice sounding nothing like the previous distorted growl. He nuzzled against Alex's hand with affection, completely unaware of what he had been transformed into or what he had done while under Alex's influence. Alex stood and turned his attention to Crawford's mangled corpse, which lay sprawled in the corner where Rex had finally finished with him. "Well, Agent Crawford," Alex said, as if addressing a living person. "I have to admit, you are more useful than I initially anticipated. Your voice, your knowledge of FBI protocols, your security clearances, and your knowledge of criminals, all very valuable assets." He knelt beside the corpse and placed his hand on Crawford's chest. Almost immediately, tendrils of biomass began extending from his palm, burrowing into the dead flesh and beginning the absorption process. "I'll make very good use of you," Alex murmured as Crawford's biological material began flowing into his own body. "Every memory, every skill, every piece of classified information you've accumulated over your career, it's all going to serve a higher purpose." The process was complete almost instantly, and when it was complete, nothing remained of Agent Jim Crawford except for the lingering scent of copper in the air. "Come on, Rex," Alex said, scratching the dog's head once more. "We have work to do. Firefly isn't going to liberate himself." 300 miles away in her office, Agent Sima Cho stared at her phone for several long minutes before finally reaching for it again. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the encrypted number Batman had provided her, then hesitated. The conversation with Crawford had gone exactly as she'd expected, his arrogant character dismissing everything she told him. She dialed the number. Batman answered on the first ring, as he always did. "What did Crawford say?" "Same as before, he dismissed everything," Cho replied, not bothering with pleasantries. She knew Batman preferred direct communication. Wouldn't listen to any of it. "He's convinced the security arrangements are foolproof and that you're just a costumed freak chasing shadows." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He's going to get himself killed. And probably take a lot of people with him." "What do you want me to do? I don't have the authority to override this federal order, and my superiors think I'm already too invested in Gotham's vigilante activities." "Nothing," Batman said. "I'll handle this personally." "Batman," Cho asked. "What are you planning?" "Something I should have done days ago. Thank you for trying, Agent Cho. Stay safe." The line went dead, leaving Cho with the uncomfortable feeling that she'd just set something irreversible in motion. The Batcave hummed with its usual array of electronic activity as Bruce Wayne descended the stone steps, his cape billowing behind him. The massive space was illuminated by the blue glow of multiple computer screens, each displaying different parts of Gotham as well as his ongoing investigation into the architect. Tim Drake looked up from the main console. "Any luck with the federal contact?" "Crawford won't listen," Bruce replied curtly,
moving to his weapons locker and beginning to select specific pieces of equipment. Which means I'm going to Pennsylvania. Stephanie Brown emerged from the training area, toweling sweat from her face after her evening workout. Pennsylvania? That's where they're holding Firefly, right? Yes, Bruce corrected. The architect has been 3 steps ahead of us this entire time. I'm not going to let him claim another victim because federal bureaucracy got in the way. Tim frowned, studying the equipment Bruce was selecting. This looks like more than just a reconnaissance mission. You're packing heavy. Bruce paused in his preparations, considering his options. The architect had proven to be unlike any opponent he'd faced before. His intelligence and his abilities made him a formidable threat. The architect isn't a normal criminal, Bruce said finally. Standard containment protocols won't work. I need to be prepared for anything. Let me come with you, Tim said, standing up from the console. 2 of us would have a better chance of, absolutely not. Bruce, be reasonable. You're talking about facing someone superhuman, someone who can shapeshift, turn people into living bombs, and who knows what else. This isn't the time for solo heroics. Stephanie nodded in agreement. Tim's right. And if you're both gone, Dick and I can handle Gotham. The city's been relatively quiet since the architect started targeting criminals anyway. Bruce turned to face them both, his expression hidden behind the cowl but his body language radiating tension. This isn't a discussion. The architect is too dangerous, and we still don't understand the full extent of his capabilities. I'm not risking either of your lives on this. With respect, Tim said, his voice taking on the stubborn edge that reminded Bruce so much of himself at that age. You trained me to be your partner, not your sidekick. I've faced metahumans before. I've dealt with serial killers, terrorist organizations, and interdimensional threats. Even if I can't handle Architect solo, I can help you from afar. Bruce's jaw tightened beneath the cowl. He wanted to argue, to lean on the protective instincts that had shaped so many of his choices over the years. But he couldn't deny the truth in Tim's words. He had trained him to be a capable partner, not a subordinate to be shielded at all costs. You shouldn't go alone, Stephanie interjected. If something happens to you, Gotham loses Batman, and the architect continues his killing spree unchecked. Bruce considered this for several long moments, his analytical mind weighing risks and probabilities. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. Tim comes with me. Stephanie, you coordinate with Nightwing to maintain coverage in Gotham. If we're off comms for more than 24 hours, contact the Justice League. Tim's face broke into a grin. Finally. When do we leave? 1 hour, Bruce replied, returning to his equipment selection.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.